Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to today's webinar, Bringing Value Stream Management to the Enterprise. Thank you for joining us. We hope in the next hour you will learn valuable information to apply to your organization. A few quick notes before we begin this webinar. The webinar itself will last approximately 60 minutes. We will be addressing questions. We will be addressing questions at the end of the webinar today, so please use the chat feature located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen to submit questions along the way. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending a link to the recording and slides. Information for claiming PDU or SEU credits will be sent in the post-webinar email as well. And without further ado, I would like to introduce myself and my esteemed colleague and partner, Mark Ricks. So my name is Logan. I work at CollabNet version 1 and am the Director of DevOps Strategy and Delivery and have the pleasure of working with many customers about doing things the DevOps way. My colleague Mark Ricks comes to us from Icon Agility Service, and he is their DevOps practice lead. And I'd like for him to say something about himself.
Hey, thanks a lot, Logan. It's great to be here. So as Logan said, my name is Mark Ricks. I'm the DevOps practice lead at a consulting company here in the U.S. called Icon Agility Services. In addition to leading the DevOps practice there, I am a regular contributor to the Scaled Agile framework, and I've been doing Agile at an enterprise level since the late 90s, so kind of been there and done that, and had Agile in my DNA since before the Agile Manifesto. So kind of all about bringing Agile into the enterprise and have a really deep passion for Lean and DevOps practices. So I'm really excited to be here with you today, Logan, talking about value stream mapping. It's one of my favorite techniques.
Thanks, Mark. Me too, and we certainly all appreciate your contributions to the SAFe work that you have been doing. All right, so real quick, we will walk through our agenda for the day. This agenda includes understanding the problems, and these are problems that Mark and I both see in the field. Mark as a consulting and coach and advisor to his customers, and myself as an implementation engineer for the CollabNet version 1 suite of products. We'll talk about making the value stream visible. We will talk about creating a plan and agreeing on metrics to measure. And then we will talk about the product and services that Mark and I represent. And following, we will have a question and answer session. And to dive right in, understanding the problems. Our first problem, one that is significantly important to many of the customers and prospects that we speak to today, is this notion of end-to-end business value visibility. The problem statement that we have here is that after product teams begin committing their code to a version control system, we lose all visibility of that change, of any change that is being moved through the system or the value stream. Mark, do you have anything or any stories or anecdotes from your current customers to share about this problem?
Definitely. This one is pretty ubiquitous. I see this all the time out in the field. And, you know, it's great that so many companies today are wanting to go Agile and transform into Lean Agile enterprises and incorporate DevOps. One of the first things they usually do is get an Agile project management system in place. They start managing their backlogs, epics, features, stories, burning them down, establishing Scrum teams. What usually happens is we have a lot of great visibility into that work through the planning and the coding cycles as we see features and stories moving through the backlog. But what invariably happens time and time again is those Scrum teams will burn down those stories, get PO acceptance on those stories, and accept them as being done. Then they'll fall off the backlog. They will be burned down. That work will be reflected in their burn down charts. But then there's no other mechanism to bring visibility to the binaries at that standpoint. So once we're done coding the work and we think we're done implementing the stories, we'll mark the stories as complete. Now there's a whole lot of work to do in integrating that work with other work, getting into the repository, sending it through testing and deployment and into release without a system to manage the visibility of that work. So it's really managing visibility of that work, of that value at the binary level that's missing from so many implementations today.
Great, thanks Mark for sharing. And I can certainly confirm that the reason we see this is that business value is super important to folks. Thought leadership has certainly been that we need to be able to track everything through the value stream. So thank you for sharing. Okay, the next slide. The next issue or the next problem that folks begin to tell us about is this notion of governance and being able to support governance or work with it better. And so the problem statement here is that organizations spend a lot of time trying to capture the events that validate their governance and risk models have been followed. Furthermore, auditors are not able to easily assess that a company is following its internal or external regulations. Mark, how about what are you seeing out in the field?
This is another huge one too, right? If we're doing Agile and DevOps continuous delivery in the large enterprise, we have to get through these governance controls frameworks. We have to get through change management. We have to find a path through change approval boards, the governance process, audit, internal audit, external audit. So how do we check the box on these kinds of activities in a way that allows us to remain consistent with our audit controls and objectives and governance models, but without slowing down the delivery process? So a lot of times what I see is governance becomes the bottleneck in the system that must be addressed. And a lot of times these governance controls and governance methods are highly paper-based. A lot of checklists, a lot of meetings, a lot of approvals, a lot of Outlook voting buttons flying around, right? But we need that in order to satisfy internal controls, external controls, change management objectives on our way into production. If we're not making that process agile, then we're not addressing the entire value stream. We're not able to deliver continuously. So governance is always there. Usually it lurks in the shadows in the initial phases of an agile transformation, but then as teams and the organizations get better and better at continuous delivery, the spotlight turns to the governance model and the change management process as usually being a remaining bottleneck.
Yes, very good. I think one cool thing that I noticed is that when we start to talk about this problem and just the emotional toll it takes on people, it's very real. When you say that it's not very easy and it takes days, months, and sometimes years for people to walk through an audit process completely, there's certainly an emotional aspect of creating a work-life balance, especially when it comes to this problem.
Exactly. Okay. If I could say one more thing about governance. Sorry, just one quick thing. So I think governance relates very directly to visibility on the last slide. So a lot of times we don't have the evidence and the proof where we need it at the right times in order to get through governance processes and change management controls swiftly. So governance needs to be there. It's a very important part of the delivery process in every organization. The question is, how do we lean it out, and how do we retool, if we have to, the governance process to make it more lean and more of an enabler of continuous delivery rather than something that we do after the fact?
Yes, agreed. And I think it follows to say that trying to make it something that we do in smaller batch sizes, just like we try to do our software development or trying to move, which is definitely what I hear when you say being more lean is something to pursue here as well. All right. And on to our final problem of measurement. So when we talk about measurement, what we really talk about is that oftentimes organizations are either not measuring the proper metric or in conjunction with not measuring the proper metrics, there's very little agreement between leadership or organizations in the metrics to measure. Mark, what do you think?
So measurement is an interesting one. I spent a lot of time in the field educating, training, and doing workshops and doing transformations with teams in the field, and measurement comes up every time. If we talk about DevOps and calms, measurement is a principle. If we talk about DevOps and within a safe construct, we have the calmer approach to DevOps. So measurement is a principle in each one of those frameworks. And overall here with value stream management, we're talking about process improvement, right? As a lean goal and as a lean technique. Well, we know that if we can't measure it, we can't manage it. And we're all here to improve the process. So let's measure the right things. Usually what's happening is there's a lot of measurement going on, but teams and organizations are measuring the wrong things. There are a lot of vanity metrics that are being tracked. Vanity metrics are metrics that are easily gained. We want to focus in on the leading indicators of success and failure, make sure that we're tracking those, making sure that we're aligned on the metrics that matter throughout the organization, and we're tracking a small handful of metrics that really matter, and we're all aligned on those metrics, and what the baseline condition of those metrics looks like, and how we're going to work together as an organization on improving those metrics together. An example here that has stuck with me over a couple of years was I was working with a client, a financial institution a few years ago, and there was a very dysfunctional relationship between IT and the business. These organizations just couldn't get along. And the IT folks believed that everything was going great. The business folks were constantly disgruntled, very upset with the state of affairs, the state of the quality coming out of the IT groups, and they looked at their measurements. I kind of stepped in and said, hey, let's have a look at what's really going on here. Let's get down to the metrics and measure some things and agree on what's happening. Well, from the IT point of view, they were measuring things like failure rates on the way into production and test coverage. So essentially with all of their projects, all of the tests were passing. They would shake down all of the bugs, and what went into production had the sign-off and approval from their business customers. So from their point of view, they checked all of the boxes. Everything was great. From a business standpoint, a few weeks into every production release, things would start breaking and start breaking hard. And then the defects would start rolling in. Well, what they were tracking on their end was mean time to restore high priority defects. On average, in this organization, it was 200 days. So on the IT side, they felt everything was hunky-dory, everything was fine, getting through projects, low failure rates with business approval. But in a production setting, everything was falling apart. And from the business standpoint, it was taking IT 200 days on average to restore service for major defects.
Yeah, that is quite a long bit of time. Okay, thanks for sharing again, Mark. I certainly can vouch to that as a implementation expert, trying to help organizations understand the proper metrics to measure. And there's the metrics specifically that we'll bring up in a little bit of a live demonstration later to help understand what to measure and what really is not a vanity metric, and what are some things that you can't gain. And one of those is that how long does it take you to fix defects measurement that Mark just brought up. All right, very good. So the next thing that I'd like to share with you is a poll that I'd like for everyone here to go ahead and participate in. Should be coming up now for us. And this is a multi-select poll. So out of the three problems that you see, which of them do you experience? And you can select more than one, so both or all three. None is also an option, so if you happen to not suffer from these three pain points, that response is certainly welcome. I still see some results coming in here. Thanks for the participation. All right. So it looks like there is almost an even distribution. What we see here is, well, not quite an even distribution. What we see here is that most of you in an even distribution suffer from business value visibility and measurement. And then, a close second there is the governance piece. And there are some folks that don't experience anything, so that's great. Now, what we'd like to do is talk about how you might try to build a solution to gain better business value visibility and be able to do governance on a much better time scale and provide more accuracy and confidence to not only your internal organization, but your auditors, your external auditors or internal auditors, in addition to improving measurement and measuring the correct things. So without further ado, we will move on here. What is the solution? We believe, both Mark and I believe, that the solution is making the value stream visible, and you could probably correlate that to making work visible, because that is what our value stream shows us. And so I will forward here to the next slide, and these are some photos that Mark is going to explain to you.
Great, thanks. So now we've introduced the concept of value stream mapping as a solution to these problems, or value stream management as a potential solution to these problems. So the core idea here is we need to get people on the same page about how the process works and how ideas move from concept to cash. Where does an idea come from? Is it the business? Is it somebody else? Is it our customers? Is it the end users? Is it the marketplace? Where are those ideas hatched? How do they get into the delivery pipeline? How do those ideas get broken down into units of work, whether they're epics, feature stories, or other kinds of requirements? And how do those requirements flow into development? How does what's being developed flow into our repositories and binaries and artifacts? And then how do those binaries and artifacts move through testing phases and into deployment delivery? And then how do we make sure that what we've spent all of this time and effort on across the organization on delivering actually produces business value? So that's really what we're calling the value stream. The path that an idea takes to go from that idea to a delivered technology solution that provides value for the business. So the first thing that we need to do, which Logan and I are positing here, is that we all need to come to agreement on what that process is in the first place. So in my experience in the field, I see some good news and bad news. So good news is when it comes to processes and the processes people take to employ this process and to move product along from concept to cash, the good news is everybody is following a process. Bad news is everybody's following a process. It's usually their own process. It's the flavor of the day. There may be an SDLC written down somewhere that is the official governance model, the official software development lifecycle model. Very few people know what it is. Even if they know what it is, usually the case is it's not being followed to a T, and the way product moves through planning, coding, building, testing, and releasing is usually a matter of who shows up that day, who's driving the process, who knows who to navigate the political waters and the technology landscape. So in order to really effectively lean out the enterprise, lean out the value stream, and move toward continuous delivery and agility, we all need to be working on the same process across the value stream from end to end and agree, first of all, on what that process is. Number two, how it's performing today, what's good about it, what's bad about it, where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses, where are the primary bottlenecks, and then how can we all work together on continually improving that value stream. So if that's the core idea, then value stream mapping is a lean technique that we apply very often here at ICON as a first step toward moving our clients toward agility. This is also a technique that's written about very frequently in Agile literature and DevOps literature. So I'm sure that many of you who have been following thought leadership in the Agile space, thought leadership in the DevOps space, whether you've been reading books or listening to reading blogs or listening to podcasts, have heard the term value stream mapping come up. It's a very, very important concept that is starting to be used more and more. We kind of wanted to amplify the message here and walk you through a little bit of what value stream mapping looks like from sort of an initial workshopping perspective, I'm going to talk through a few slides on Icon's approach to approaching value stream mapping with real people in a human setting, in an interactive setting, doing a sort of a tabletop exercise that usually lasts a few days, and then how we can transition that knowledge into a tool for ongoing management of the value stream. So what we're looking at here is some sample output from the workshops. These workshops are fun, they're highly interactive. What we do is we get people who are involved in the value stream from end to end, involved in a 2 to 3 day workshop, and we talk about the process and get everybody aligned from beginning to end. These are business folks, these are dev, this is operations, these are testers, this is information security, architects, management, executives, anybody who either is involved in that value stream at some point or has an interest in how that value stream performs, involved in the workshop, talking about things together. And this is kind of how the output looks at the end of these sessions. So to take this one step further, one thing that we do with this output is we make it a little bit more readable.
Hey, Mark, I have one question. Could you explain to the folks on the phone a little bit maybe about the colors that you have represented here?
Oh, sure. So often the colors don't really matter from workshop to workshop, but within each workshop, we use color coding to differentiate between the activities in the workflow and different colors for who is responsible for acting on the product at that particular stage of the workflow, different colors for identifying the major problems, and different colors for identifying potential solutions to those problems. So you see a lot of different colors, and from one photo to the next here, there really isn't a whole lot of continuity, but if you look within any particular photo, like the one in the bottom left, we're consistent with yellow from left to right, and the reds move from left to right. So it's just a way to distinguish the elements of the value stream map, distinguishing from the processes, the people who own those steps in the processes, and various points of ideation on what the problems are and where the solutions might be. Does that do it justice, Logan?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So this is all a very fun exercise, but we need to start taking action on this and get it into a more of a readable format. So here is another view of one of those examples from the previous slide. This particular example came directly from a value stream mapping workshop that we did here in the US with a client of ours in the first quarter of this year. Very fun exercise with a payment processing organization working with a few of their teams. And so this is an example of one of their team's value stream from end to end. So I'll just kind of walk through the mechanics of this briefly and then show how this evolves into an action plan over the next few slides. So essentially the way this works is we start up here with the business. I'm going to use my fancy arrow pointer. So everything starts up here with the business, and these lean value stream maps always start from a customer perspective. The input into the process is a request from somebody on the business side. Then we send that request into essentially our technology pipeline or technology value stream. We start with planning. This team then moved into coding and unit testing, building, deploying to QA, and then eventually out to deployment to prod. And this closes the loop. Once that feature is deployed to prod, that feature is made available for consumption by the business, and that's where value is realized. And so the value stream is this set of activities. The next layer down is the teams or the roles of the people responsible for performing those activities. For example, in this case, the planning is done by product management and architecture. The coding is done by the development team. Deploying to QA is done by the operations team, and so on. And below those, we have metrics. So at each activity level, we track metrics that matter. So we talked a little bit earlier about getting to metrics that mean something and are leading indicators of success. So here within value stream mapping, we use these every time. Lead time, which is the end-to-end lead time of performing this activity. How long does it take to actually do the planning, how much work time is associated with the product management and architecture function, plus whatever wait time is associated with that. In other words, there might be a feature request that comes in from the business, and it sits in the product management queue for a few days, a few weeks before the product managers and architects become available to work on it. So in lead time, we count the actual work time plus whatever wait time is associated with having to wait for somebody to show up and pick up the ball and do the work. Then PT down here is process time. That's just the time it takes to actually do the work. This is work time. It's hands-on time. And this %CNA is % complete and accurate. This is a measurement of the work that's coming from the previous activity that is usable as is by the people doing this function. So it's a quality metric. Another example of that is %CNA coming into the coding step. What we're saying here is that 60% of the output from the plan stage is usable as is by the coders. That means that 40% of that work that comes into the dev team from the planning team needs to go back to planning for elaboration, additional information, maybe some Q&A, some refinement in order to get it to a point where the dev team can actually use it and start work. It's a measure of the quality of the information that's flowing from activity to activity. So these three metrics together are very powerful, and we track them every time at an activity level. Then these roll up into these aggregated metrics that reflect measurements from end to end throughout the entire value stream. So in this particular case, the total lead time from end to end, from feature request to feature delivery through the entire value stream, was 269 days. So what this tells us is for this team, as viewed from a customer's perspective, it takes 269 days, or right around 9 months, to fully deliver a feature from request to final delivery. Of those 269 days, 64.5 days were actual work time. Hands-on time, we're touching the product, we're adding value, we're actually doing planning, we're doing coding, we're doing building, we're doing testing, we're doing deployments, versus waiting for somebody to show up. So the difference between process time and lead time gives us an indication of process efficiency, how much actual work time versus wait time is there in the system. That gives us the activity ratio, 24%. So 24% of the overall duration, the overall lead time, is actual work time. The rest is wait time or potential delay. And then our rolled %CNA is an aggregation, actually a product of each of those %CNA numbers down at the bottom. This tells us overall how effective our process is from a quality perspective. The way to read this is, of 100 things that flow through this value stream, 26 of those items, 26 of those feature requests move all the way through without stopping or without incurring any loopbacks or rework. The rest incur some amount of loopback and rework, refinement, elaboration, that kind of thing. So we track these, and we come up with a picture like this that represents the current state that we're trying to improve upon. Once we have that, we move on to the next overlay, which is to start to identify the big problems in the system. So where do we have primary constraints? Where do we have big bottlenecks? We start to generate a heat map based on the metrics that really stand out as potential performance killers. So in this case, we can look at some of these metrics like total lead time, 269 days. Seems a little too long, right? If we're trying to evolve toward an agile enterprise, continuous delivery, 269 days, essentially 9 months to deliver on a single feature, it's probably too long. So we want to point that out. So we look at the process time and the lead time and %CNA of each of these, and we have a conversation about which ones are really the performance killers and which ones really stand out as the primary bottlenecks, the things that we want to prioritize and start to address very, very quickly. So in this case, the team identified the plan stage and the acceptance test stage as being the primary bottlenecks. largely because of the amount of wait time that was in those activities. High lead times, relatively low process times, very high lead time over here in planning with comparatively little actual work time or process time. So we identify the potential bottlenecks and problems, and then we start to ideate on potential solutions. This is where we bring in the Agile mindset, the XP, the Scrum, the DevOps mindset, and start to talk about real solutions to these problems. What can we do tactically? What are the skill sets that we can develop? What are the mindsets that we need to start adopting? What are some of the technologies and tools that we think we should bring into focus to start to potentially address these problems? So here, with these blue labels, we have conversations about things like behavior-driven design, test-driven development, test automation as a potential solution for driving down the overall lead time of unit testing. Here we see test automation again as a potential solution for driving down this 46-day lead time in the acceptance test phase. Test data management, gated commits from a continuous integration perspective. Perhaps feature toggles can help with the coding stage and help us achieve a decoupling of deployment from release downstream. So in this part of the workshop, we're having open discussions about what are some of the potential solutions to these problems. But at this point, we haven't really narrowed in on the high priority ones in an action plan. That's the next stage. So here we go through some prioritization exercises. Maybe this is some root cause analysis. We like Ishikawa diagrams, fishbone diagrams, Pareto analysis, and various other techniques for separating the wheat from the chaff and sort of sifting out some of the solutions that are nice to have, but they really won't move the needle on these metrics. So here, this final view is really a target state where we've identified in yellow the activities that we want to improve, and in blue, the techniques, the practices, or the tools that will help us get there. In this case, behavior-driven design, TDD, test automation, and deployment automation. Those are the things that we want to prioritize first and start taking action on immediately. By doing that, we will start to move the needle on some of these metrics in green. And that will have an overall impact and sort of a compounding effect on these aggregated metrics up at the top. So what does that all mean at the end of the day? We kind of produce an improvement plan out of that, and this is what goes back into the portfolio, back to management, back into PI planning, whatever your process is for getting new ideas for improvement into the funnel and organizing teams and budgets around actually doing the work. This is sort of that step, right? We've come to an agreement on the plan, what we're going to do about it, and here's just a summary of what this particular team set out to do as a result of the value stream mapping exercise. Do these things based on some prioritization. So here we applied weighted shortest job first analysis to come up with a forced rank order of these actions. And then we always want to include a view of how we're going to noticeably or measurably or tangibly improve our metrics, whether they relate to quality metrics, velocity metrics, or a combination of the two. So here, sort of a one-page snapshot of what we're going to do to improve the process, accelerate delivery, and improve quality, and what we're going to measure as sort of a definition of done or measures of success for this improvement plan. And we always want to bound it in some time component. So here for this team, they were setting out to make these improvements over a 2-quarter or a 2 PI program increment, if in safe terms, in order to show improvement. So this kind of gives us a bounded context and some SMART goals for moving forward with a DevOps transformation, along with some agility improvements within the context of enabling continuous delivery across the entire value stream. So at this point, we've done the analysis, we have the plan, but the question is, not only how do we start to take action on this, but how do we not lose sight of these metrics and these plans as we're continuously delivering? So it's really, at this stage, it's about how do we retain visibility of these components of the plan and check our work, get continuous feedback against these metrics and against this plan as we roll through iterations and months and quarters. So at this point, I'll hand it back over to Logan, who will show you how we transition from this state, sort of a workshop state, into using a tool to manage the value stream.
Thanks, Mark. There were a couple of really good questions that came in while you were presenting that, and that was really great. One of them was, is the lead time estimated up front, or are these metrics that were calculated along the way to get actuals?
So the baseline metrics are always measurements of actuals, so how activities are performing today. And sometimes we find that the teams have that information at hand. They can pull it from a system or pull it from a subject matter expert. Sometimes it requires a conversation and a little bit of averaging and people with different opinions coming to agreement on maybe the average or the most common lead time. But yes, for the current state, we're always looking at actual numbers. How do these activities perform today from an end-to-end lead time perspective?
Great, awesome. And then another one, this person wrote, I understand value stream analysis sometimes turn into a process map instead of a value stream. Excuse me, I'm reading the wrong question. Apologies here. This person wrote, in a shop that has many different technologies, mainframe, open systems, containers, etc., it is nearly impossible to create a common value stream, isn't it? So kind of leading you there, but what are your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very good observation. So what we like to do is separate the value stream maps, or do a value stream map per value stream or per deployment pipeline in the organization. So I don't think I've ever seen a single value stream that encompasses the entire enterprise, because we have different technology stacks, right? We have different solutions. Sometimes we're running through environments that are completely in the cloud. Maybe we're doing closure script development on a front-end application, and everything is done in the cloud using cloud technology. And we might be doing some internal .NET or ASP.NET development using a Microsoft stack that has completely different environments and completely different pipeline tooling. So we want to separate those two because those are essentially different technology value streams that support different areas of the business. So what we usually do is right off the bat, before we begin the value stream mapping exercise, we agree with the organization and the teams on which product line or set of products or operational value stream or business process we're supporting, and narrow in on the technology stack that supports that, and then sort of build the value stream map based on that tech stack.
Yeah, very good. I would like to confirm that that approach, in that we have similar questions when we come on site for an implementation workshop of our own, where there's a rather large organization that has multiple frameworks, and they will not share a common value stream. Good. Thank you there, Mark.
Right. Very good question.
One other thing. Yeah, it was a very good question. One other thing I think maybe you can help me confirm is, when we get a chance to do these workshops, and they obviously have a little bit of a different flavor and a little bit of a different outcome, but the commonality of what we're trying to achieve, maybe from a coaching perspective like you, or a product perspective like me, and potentially both, is the feedback that I get when that workshop has completed, and you've had a group of people who don't normally work together, or at least don't work together very often, get together, identify what these activities are, identify the proper metrics to measure, identify where those metrics sit today, and identify the bottlenecks. I think they really, what I see is that people really begin to get a sense of a camaraderie, because they can see the full process and begin to understand where exactly they can work together to make those improvements. And it's quite a great what I'll call a kumbaya moment, where people really agree to work together to make improvements, at least at that point in time.
I totally agree. It's a great bonding experience for teams. The more cross-functional representation we have throughout the entire value stream, the more of a bonding experience is, and the more accurate and valuable the output is, right? So we know that in especially large enterprises, there are a lot of different teams across a lot of different silos who play some role in product delivery, right? So we like to get all of them involved in these workshops, talking about the process, providing clarity on what their job actually is, and then getting feedback from everybody else in the value stream about how their work affects everybody else's work. So coming together, having a kumbaya, having a bonding moment, a religious experience about coming to terms with what the process actually is, and then agreeing on what the process should be, and what we can all do together as a unified team on solving very specific issues in very specific ways to move the needle on very specific performance metrics. Yeah, it's always an eye-opening experience, and usually, it's fun. It's a couple of days, 2 or 3 days of time invested for usually, maybe about a dozen, 15 people, 20 on the top side. So it is an investment in time, but what we have as output is potentially 1,000 hours or more of person time invested in this deep analysis and agreement on what we should be doing about it. It's usually time and effort and collaboration that doesn't normally take place to support these transformation initiatives. Right.
Yeah, I would agree. And it is very transformational, and that is a very good type of thing to see, especially when you have maybe not only people that don't normally work together, but when leadership kind of comes together to either be present and part of that or see the outcome. I see some really great transformation, at least to begin with. All right.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Thanks, Mark. So I'm going to hop into the demonstration portion of this. And before I start, I would like to mention just real quickly, when Mark and I talked about planning this section, it's really great to work with Mark. He has a very analytical mind, and approach this from what problems do we see people have, and how do we help them solve them. This agreeing on metrics to measure piece really kind of sparked our attention in not only being able to identify them, but also being able to measure them, right? So the three that Mark mentioned that were important in his value stream mapping, just to kind of reiterate these things for the folks on the phone, is process time, lead time, percent complete accurate, right? So those are 3 things that we're gathering in this workshop event that help us try to see where we are and where we're going. Now, if anybody here is familiar with the State of DevOps reports that have been coming out for the past few years, those folks have identified 4 key metrics that are important to also understanding where you're going and how you're doing. And 3 of those 4 are embodied in what I will show you now, including the 3 metrics that Mark has shown. So we will have 6 metrics to show. The 3 that are important that I can demonstrate to you are understanding our deployment frequency, understanding our lead time, understanding our change failure rate. All right. So first up is understanding what we call a value stream management solution. So where Mark and I have been up to this point is really trying to talk about kind of the discipline of getting started, discipline of understanding the value stream. Next is going to be this understanding of how you might try to solve the problem or begin to understand the problem and solve the problem with a product. So you're looking at a screenshot of the version 1 solution while I switch over to my application here to show you what it looks like in real person. And that's coming up right now for you. Great. What I have landed here is what we call the portfolio Kanban. And what we begin to help customers out here is with this notion of understanding or seeing the full value stream and business value visibility. And these columns here you'll see are very similar to the things that Mark showed you that he captured in his workshop. And the cards here are showing our features and how they're flowing through that value stream and in which status or which column they might be. You'll also notice that in addition to the ability to move these cards from status to status or column to column, which is on a Kanban board typically something a person does, the solution also provides these pills at the bottom of the card. And what these pills represent is actual information that the solution is gathering about where in your delivery pipeline the stories or defects associated with this feature are. Have they been started? Are they in development? Do we have any commits against them? Have they been packaged? Are they past the commit phase, and have they begun the process of moving through the pipeline to be delivered, then delivered as the final stage, or released to be used by your end users? And so here we can see we're giving you that full picture view of, hey, I have this UX maintenance feature that has something like somewhere around 60, we'll say 66 or 62 stories associated with it, and we can see exactly where, from both a planning and delivery perspective, this is. Okay. Next is the notion of what I'm walking through are 5 capabilities that value stream management solutions are going to provide to you. So the next big one is providing visibility and traceability. Okay, and where we're going here is when you looked at Mark's value stream map, he identified some key activities that each organization kind of looks at. And what if there was a way for you to be able to actually implement these activities in a system to actually keep track of them based on the delivery pipelines that you may have currently built, right? So most of you, or at least some of you, have these things called Jenkins and these things called Urban Code Deploy and Bamboo, and you have source control management and all kinds of fun tools that you have to put together to get your software from concept to cache. And what we like to do is take an understanding of those integrations and take an understanding of the value stream map and hook all of that together into one solution with version 1 so that you can see the activities here. So I have a build activity, I have a check for readiness activity. By the way, this product is also capturing the manual things that people have to do, or the manual decision points that people have to make a decision in. And we're beginning to understand, as work flows through this pipeline, what is actually going on. Notice here too that our solution allows you to capture some of these metrics that you come up with in the workshop. So as you saw, Mark had captured this deploy to QA activity. And in that activity, the lead time was 6 days and the process time was 3 days, and the percent complete and accurate was 90. And so not only do we have this measure of where we started, this product, and I'll get to the metrics section in just a few minutes, will begin to show you how you're tracking against those sorts of things. All right, next is this notion and capability of being able to provide comprehensive workflow automation and repeatability. What does that mean? That's a pretty big mouthful of things that we want to help out with. So if I come back to my demonstration here, the notion of value stream management is really important. Notice that when I spoke about what we're capturing not only from a workshop perspective but an integration perspective is, what if there's a way to capture and tie together tools in a way that gets you the common data or answers to the common metrics that you're looking for. And so here you can see I've got an example pipeline that ties together GitLab from a source control perspective. It ties together version 1 by setting statuses in that, on any backlog items, stories, or defects that are associated with this working pipeline. And then we run a Jenkins build, and then maybe we want to get information out of Jenkins, and then we do something else within the solution to create an artifact or package something up and send it on its way through the assembly line. What is really important about understanding this notion of the comprehensive workflow automation and repeatability is, yes, it has become increasingly easy to be able to codify automated processes and orchestrate them together. But what we find is that many organizations still have a lot of manual work that they have to keep track of. And there is a way in this solution to begin to take the automation, tie it together with manual work, and then get all of the information and metrics and reporting on metrics and constant feedback that are important to your journeys in Agile and DevOps. All right. Then number 4 of 5, tightly coupling planning activity with the DevOps machine. So, we looked at this thing called the portfolio Kanban on the version 1 side, and there's also this thing called delivery at a glance that gives you the opportunity to understand how complete your features are. So, as I look at this final column of my UX maintenance portfolio item, I can see that there's a done of 34.8, which is, when we talk about being done, we usually talk about development has been completed. There's no more active development and iteration for a developer to do. But where done is really supposed to mean we've delivered things to customers. We've really kind of separated ourselves between being done. Sometimes you'll hear people say, we're done. We've just chosen to use a different word, and that is delivered. And so what you get here is, if I'm looking at that UX maintenance feature, and we're trying to understand where in the delivery process, each one of these backlog items is, I can see very quickly here that some of them are done, some of them are delivered. These are actual stories and defects in my system that I can go see, hey, what was the team actually working on? And they get tied back to the actual commits that came in from our GitLab system in my demo. We can see which packages and versions of the software they're supposed to go out in. And then, of course, there's all of the details that are gathered during the story creation process. All right. And, I'm on number 4 now. Self-documenting audit and compliance. This will be really quick. So I'm going to show you just 2 quick views that kind of show you that this notion of, and this is tying us back to the problem of governance. How are we improving the process where people get more value out of their governance process? Okay, so version 1 has 2 very quick ways that help you out with this. And while I go to the right screen here. So if I want to look at the process that some story went through. So let's say, let's set the stage. Let's just say you have an internal auditor or an external auditor who you've got documentation for that says we're going to follow our process A, B, C, D through Z. And that person wants to come in and make sure that you've done that. In times past, we've had customers who said, well, we had to go in our Excel spreadsheets and our work order systems and our change management systems and try to put together another Excel spreadsheet that cobbles together all the information about a certain set of stories, or maybe all of the stories that we worked on in the last 90 days to a year. Well, what if you had a solution that just captured all of that information here at once? And here you can see that if I want to see if we're following the process on a specific story, I'm capturing promotions to different parts of the value stream. I'm capturing build pipelines here. I'm capturing when we've deployed something to a new environment. Here, I am, we go all the way back to when change was made. So the very bottom of this timeline represents that change, or those changes that started this story. Right, so we're connecting commit all the way to the end of the process. Now, very quickly here, the next thing is this notion of being able to provide one simple report for whether or not you're compliant to those audit processes or your governance process. If I want to know how any one version of my application that might be tied back to hundreds of commits and dozens of stories, how did it fare through this project? You know, your auditor comes in and says, tell me how this version did. Give me all the information that you have about it. Or, you know, is it following the process? There is a report that can be generated in version 1 that replaces that Microsoft Excel spreadsheet and replaces the time that you have to spend to go back and make sure that each one of your stories followed a process. So I've got this full report here that says I have stories in this version of my mobile app 9.0.65 that followed the process. When things started, when things ended, did a user have to interact with this, and what were their notes? We also get, if I had some in my little report here, the number of work items that are associated with backlog items, and then what changes from source control are represented here. Okay, and finally, how do we capture and show you those metrics? I've got a brief minute here to walk through. I'm just going to show you my slide because my application is not going to be different from my slide. But a lot of the information that Mark told you about, what are we trying to capture from a value stream perspective is captured here, plus a little bit more, right? So that top left column shows you, and we're looking at a specific version of an application here. The top left column shows you work in progress. One of the keys to understanding how you work and one of the keys to becoming better is understanding work in progress. Too much work in progress can really hurt your team or your organization. So getting a really good picture of that. Understanding your work item lead time. So for this solution, understanding from commit to delivery, how long is it taking us, days, weeks, months, hours, to get from beginning to end. And that's what you see in that top right column. You heard Mark talk about the activity ratio. That is an efficiency by phase that we capture, or efficiency that we capture in these bottom two quadrants to show you how well in certain parts of the value stream or how efficient you are, and then over the course of that whole value stream, how efficient you are. All right. So we have reached the end of the material here, and there look like there are a few good questions. But before I hit those questions off, I just wanted to give Mark a chance to add anything that he may have seen or heard to expound upon based on that demo.
Nothing to expand upon, but that was great information. People were very engaged during that. I did my best to address as many questions as I could during that time, and I did flag a few for follow-up here.
All right. I'm going to pick one since we are at the top of the hour here, and we will get back to the others that have an open question. So I'm going to answer this one. We get this very commonly in our workshops, in our consulting activities, and our product implementation activities, and that is, how do you capture reworked activities? That, first of all, typically will require you to have a very good backlog system where you're able to make sure that you're creating defects in the same place as you're creating your stories, so that you can actually associate a story to a defect, or at least your two systems talk to each other. And the thing that the solution provides you and consulting can help out with is this understanding of which files in my source control system or which commits are typically creating the defects. And if those defects are properly associated back to stories, then we can begin to see what trends we might have. Is there a fragile piece of code that we need to refactor? Is there some training we need to get for our developers or our testers to do a little bit better job of, do better in our job? Those sorts of questions can be asked and answered. All right, so very good question there. The others that we have left is, and we will get back to you at the end of this. So I would like to thank all of you for joining us, even a little past the hour here. That is it. So I really thank you. And have a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. And thank you, Logan.
Thank you, Mark.